not wear my Napoleon outfit today, which you know I own. I thought about it, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to iron the pants, and I don't care that much. So, here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. This is the... You are such a weasel. I'm going to keep that in. All right, here's the deal. This is the Battle of Waterloo. It was fought in Belgium, June 18th, 1815. And what we have when it comes to the adversaries, you have the French Empire represented by Napoleon Bonaparte. And we've already talked a little bit about the history of France in the Napoleonic era. He was able to field about 73,000 troops. This is a pretty large number. It's not huge for Napoleon standards, but it's still a pretty big deal. Most of his soldiers were veterans. He's going to have about 50,000 regular infantry soldiers. He's going to have 14,000 cavalry, or give or take. And he's going to have a substantial number of cannon, or guns. And one of the issues that the Seventh Coalition, or the Allies, are going to face is that they did not have a large number of veteran soldiers. They had about 7,000 veterans from the Peninsular Campaign. And so you've got 7,000 veterans against 73,000 or so veterans. This is going to be an interesting thing. As a matter of fact, Wellington, who is the commander of the British forces and the Allied forces, stated that his soldiers were ill-equipped and led by officers who were inexperienced. And so it's going to be kind of interesting to see. We know already that the Prussians had been basically run off the battlefield by the French, and Blucher is off over here somewhere, and he is not on the battlefield. The terrain that was actually chosen by Wellington, because he had enough time to move back and form his troops basically along this ridge right here. This is a field area, but it's a pretty small field when it comes to a battle of this size. This is not a big battlefield. It's very small. Basically, you have about, once they set themselves up, you have a little less than a mile between armies. And it's not that wide. It's only about 3 miles wide. Now, to us, that seems like a pretty big area, but when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers, this is a small battlefield. What's going to happen is it had been raining. And so Napoleon is not interested in moving his troops early in the morning because he's afraid that his cannon will get mired in the muck. His cavalry might have problems running through the muddy field. And so he waits to launch his attack. What's going to happen? Wellington's troops are up along this ridge. They have cannons to protect them. He has his center here, which is a very strong center, and cavalry on the wings. But he has also decided to take these fortified structures and put his men inside them to kind of protect his wings. Because one of the things that you want to do, if you have the ability to do it, is to get your army to the flank of the enemy, because the flank is where you have fewer guns pointing forward, right? And so if you can swing around, then you can make a mess of the enemy. And so what Wellington has done is he's secured his flanks. He's anchored them here, and then also in the center. And so what Napoleon wants to do, in order to turn the flank, Napoleon thinks what he's going to do is he's going to take Hougomont here first, and this is how he's going to start the battle. So in order to initiate the beginning of this battle, at about 11:30 in the morning, which is very late, he's going to launch. His brother is actually going to be in command, and they're going to attack this building. Now, it was supposed to be a diversion. It was not supposed to be the main attack. The idea was, and Napoleon was not stupid, this was smart, attack here And then Wellington will take his reserves in the center and move them here to protect this flank. What would that allow Napoleon then to do? What do you think? Yeah.
Go up the other side.
Well, they could do it. They could possibly win and go here, or they could attack here.
That's what I.
Or, yep. Or if the center is weakened, what can he do?
Attack the middle.
Go straight up the center. Right? Napoleon is thinking, I'm going to fake here and strike here. Right? He has to do this before the Prussians can get back to the battlefield. Now, Wellington was assured the Prussians would be back already. Blücher was supposed to be there by morning, and he hasn't arrived yet. Wellington has to fight. Now, here's the deal. It looks like the 7th Coalition has 118,000 men, but they don't have the Prussians. So you knock 50,000 off of this, and these two numbers are very similar. So the British versus the French, very similar in number. The French have an advantage in big guns. That's a problem on a battlefield. So, plus you're up against Napoleon. He's good. So, the battle commences. And what you have here is these forces move forward. And so they engage here. All right? The problem is they're up against a big stone wall. This place might as well be a castle. And it doesn't go well. However, that's a small number of soldiers against a big number of soldiers. But these guys fight unbelievably bravely. They refuse to quit. They keep sending men forward. Eventually, they actually break through the door. A whole bunch of these guys get inside that building. And then the British lock the door. And then massacre them. So this is not going well for the French. They're losing a lot of guys. Right? So what happens is these guys are going away. There's not as many of them because they're being killed. And Wellington doesn't take the bait. He stays here. Right? This is a big deal. This goes on for more than an hour and nothing happens. The French are losing. So Napoleon says, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to default to my strength. Big guns. And what he does is he starts to fire on the troops that are up on this hill. What could Wellington do to make sure that his troops don't all get killed by cannon fire? What could he do? Yeah, who said that?
Me.
Oh, really? Oh, good job. Back up a little bit. And so what he did is he had his soldiers back behind the ridge. This is pretty smart. As a matter of fact, at one point in the battle, he had his soldiers lay down. That was not common practice on the battlefield. I would do it, but they just didn't do it. Here you have these guys behind the ridge or lying down. The French cannon fire, while it is extremely powerful and can be devastating, the effects are limited on the British troops. But the French believe that, oh man, have we wiped out a lot of those British soldiers? They have to have believed that. And so what's going to happen is the French are going to initially, at about 1:30, they're going to launch an attack. And this first attack is going to go up this way. So these guys are going to go here. Right? They've already tried to attack here, and it didn't work. Then they move up this direction. And unfortunately, what they find is the British troops have not been devastated. They stand up and they fire volley after volley of musketry into the advancing French troops. And here's something you need to know about battles back then. When you were advancing forward and you were heading towards the enemy, you weren't shooting, because you couldn't effectively shoot while you were moving and stay in formation. So you marched toward the enemy until you were told to stop and fire, or until you were told to fix bayonets and charge. So what you have is French infantry moving this way constantly under fire. When the guy in front of you gets hit, you take his place. This has to be unbelievably devastating, and it takes unbelievable discipline to know that the guys in front of you are shooting at you and you can't do anything yet. Well, what's going to happen is this initial attack is going to fail. It does not work. These guys move forward, and once they get here, they really can't do anything. In fact, frequently when the French cavalry come upon the British soldiers, the British do something interesting. Instead of being in lines, pretty darn thin lines, usually of just 2 men to widen the battlefield, they start to form into squares. They're actually called hollow squares. And what these are is they're squares, and the guns can point out in every direction, like a hedgehog or a porcupine. And they do this to stop cavalry charges. Because if a guy on a horse rushes up here, and there's a bunch of guys with guns and bayonets, the horse doesn't want to go here, so the horse goes here. What's going to be here? More guns and bayonets. It's a beautiful defensive position. Now, you can't move. It would look really weird if you did, but you really can't move like this. But this is extremely effective against cavalry. Right? Your cavalry can't really get here. You've got a guy with a sword trying to come at you, and there's a whole bunch of guys there with bayonets and guns. Not effective. So the French cavalry is forced to retire. They go back here. There's, of course, fewer of them. The French infantry is not only facing musketry, but now they're facing canister shot. And they are forced to retreat. And there are dramatically fewer of them. You see what's starting to happen. The British are not moving. The British under Wellington are staying in their fortified as you can be, positions, and the French are forced to attack them. And the British are winning. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying, what about a mix of infantry and cavalry against the kind of porcupine?
What you can do, and what the French tried to do, is they did try to coordinate that. If you can coordinate an infantry assault with a cavalry assault, what these guys really can't form into these squares because the enemy infantry can pour more gunfire on them, right? And so you don't want to do that. What you need to do is you need to coordinate your cannon, your cavalry, and your infantry. And that was where it failed here. The French were unable to coordinate their big guns to support this. It just wasn't effective. It's going to happen one more time in this battle, right? Just so you know. What will happen, interestingly enough, is, this was a mistake, the English heavy cavalry are going to charge. And they're going to charge against the French. When they see the French fleeing, the cavalry comes in and they're like, we are going to cut down the French when they're running away. Unfortunately, in their zeal to win, the English cavalry went a bit too far. And what will happen to them is they are going to get themselves surrounded, and they're going to have to eventually retreat. And so the English cavalry is going to be really, really, really negatively impacted. So there's not as many of them, right? And so the cavalry thought they could win this battle by charging. They charged too far, their horses got tired, and they got all split up, all right? What's going to happen next is at about 4 o'clock, this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's going to be a move up the center. And this is going to be a big move. What's happening now is word is coming in that the Prussians are on their way. As a matter of fact, the Prussians show up in a couple of areas. First, they're here. They're also going to come up here. This is a big deal. This is going to force Napoleon to do something. Napoleon says, I got to give up command of the battle here, and I actually have to make sure that these guys are taken care of. So he's going to have to move some of his forces over here to deal with the Prussians that are in his rear. And this is a problem. The Prussians are also going to come up from the north. Napoleon gives command to Marshal Ney. And Marshal Ney says, you got it, we're going to make our attack. And what he does is Marshal Ney is going to launch an attack here initially, which at first is unsuccessful, finally is successful, and they do take this fortified area. But then he continues his attack and launches forward. The problem is, Ney went too far. And when he went in with his cavalry, he sent his cavalry in too far. And again, just like what happened to the English, they got in too far. British are going to form into hollow squares, and this cavalry attack is going to fail. Now, had Ney supported that cavalry attack more effectively, it might have worked. He did bring up big guns here. Right? He did, and this is a big deal. At this point, the French should win. They've got big guns here, they've got an attack here, and Wellington now sees his troops are actually getting shot point blank with cannon. Wellington has a choice. He can disengage, he can back away and keep his army alive, or he can continue to fight and see his men die. Not a good position to be in. Luckily for Wellington, the Prussians arrive. So we have a massive influx of Prussian soldiers. Napoleon is then in a crummy situation. This attack in the center was ineffective, so it's almost like they're back to stage one. But the only problem is Napoleon has the Prussians to deal with. And so what Napoleon decides to do is he is going to block the Prussians here with as much as he can. He's going to drop back some of these troops. He's going to drop back some of his cavalry to stop them here as long as he can. And then Napoleon is going to send in his best soldiers, the Imperial Guard. They are going to charge up here, and they are going to take the English center. If they can take the English center, and these are guys who are veterans. These are amazing soldiers. They've been held in reserve because they are the most feared soldiers in all of Europe. And they're going to march forward. And this is what happens. Napoleon sends his Imperial Guard forward. And they make it to the ridge. And that's when they get hit by cannon, and that's when they get hit by organized musketry, and they begin to waver. Here are guys that have marched all this way under heavy fire, but they're still together. They still are going to win. They know that. They've never lost. They get here, and they are just ravaged by musketry, cannons. And then Wellington orders his soldiers to fix bayonets. What the Imperial Guard then sees is a whole bunch of fresh soldiers with bayonets on their weapons preparing to charge. It was too much. The Imperial Guard begins to retreat. At this point, Wellington orders a general advance. That means chase them down. And what's going to happen is the French soldiers see the Imperial Guard for the first time ever retreating, and it disheartens them. They're finished. They're done. Had it not been for the Imperial Guard, who stopped here, they retreated, then they stopped and reformed, and they fought the British to slow them down, Napoleon would have been captured on the battlefield. As it was, Napoleon actually had to jump out of his carriage because it was moving too slowly so that he could escape the battle. And Wellington takes the field with the Prussians, the headquarters of Napoleon. Is that really class? Oh my goodness. Well, we'll talk about that later. Thank you guys. We're going to head towards G2.